Well, hi everybody. We are glad to be with you again.
Yeah,
Jeff
always,
Hopper with
yeah.
Jeffrey Cranford and our friend, the Apostle Paul,
The
who we're
Apostle
getting
Paul,
to know
that's
better
right.
and better with every one of these conversations. This time we're going to talk a little bit about how you can be a disciple in the real world. I think sometimes people look at somebody like the Apostle Paul and say, well, of course, he spent all day, every day doing nothing but attending to the spiritual life. How does that even apply to me? Because I'm living in the real world.
Sure.
Let me ask you, you have seen some people who as you've interacted with tour players and whatnot, who have done a really nice job of balancing the demands of competing at the very top level. We forget there's 700 Major League Baseball players in the world. There are only a couple hundred golfers who play at that level.
And the longevity in football or baseball. Football, I think, is 2 years, the average lifespan, and there's 1,200 players. There's 30 teams with 40 some odd players.
Yeah.
And golf is sometimes you have 20-year careers and there's only 130 guys.
Yeah.
Or
So it's a narrow field.
And it's a world game versus just a national game.
That's true too.
Right.
So to maintain the ability to continue to compete out there, you have to attend to
Arduous.
But you've seen some who've done that and kept it balanced with their real world life, haven't you?
Yeah, there's no question, and especially guys that are very intentional. We've got a number of guys. There's the Bernard Longers and the Tom Lamans have now kind of worked their way through the Champions Tour, though still very, very competitive,
right?
Even into their Bernard into his 60s, who've loved Jesus, have given countless hours, investments of time, tournament weeks, doing outreaches, doing philanthropic stuff, in the name of Jesus. Now there's that new kind of level, very intentional guys. Good friends, Zach Johnson, Ben Crane, Aaron Badley, very intentional, and others. But those three really come to mind as we're sitting here, very intentional about discipleship and sharing Jesus and being intentional about the PGA Tour Bible study and other things. And now just an influx of some of the guys that we've even brought to you in the magazine at various points. And Blaine Barber and some of these other guys, very intentional about their faith. Trey Mullinax and some of these other guys that are coming up, in their mid to early 20s, and just phenomenal. But they really do realize that this is a temporary platform, and golf is, yes, that's how they put food on the table, and yet they find time, they make time to make sure that they are very much participants in the kingdom.
Yes, and you're right. In the magazine, we feature that a lot. I was very impressed this year with Amy Olsen's story.
Yes.
Amy, who was the runner-up at Avion, and also had a top 10 in the desert here at the ANA last year. Just this attention to my spiritual life in addition to my golf game, and my family life and my married life, and this nice balance. Do we see that in the life of Paul anywhere? Were there places where he had to strike a balance? He had to be part of real-world living?
Well, for sure. I think Acts chapter 18, we get a picture of him actually doing some tent making. And you hear that throughout the Christian community now. We use that as just kind of a cliche, right? So what's your tent making that you're doing?
But that was a literal thing.
That was a literal thing for him. He'd met this Priscilla and Aquila there, and they partnered together, and they were Jewish. One was Jewish and one not, and they partnered together as a team, and they loved Jesus. They were kingdom people, and they did some work on the side. I know my own personal experience is that I was a slow progress into actual ministry, and even as a pastoral ministry now, where I would go out. I used to go to Aspen, and in 3 months I'd make enough to come back and live and do ministry for the rest of the year, and it was a slow progress. And still to this day, I still enjoy being out in the work world a little bit, and because it engages the world with me without just getting in my little holy huddle with Christians, So there's something a guy came in to know fairly well from the Guinness family, Os Guinness, some of you may have read, but he wrote a book called The Call, a great book, and he begged people not to go into quote-unquote full-time ministry as it was usually perceived. He said, stay. If you're a mechanic, be a mechanic and take Christ into the mechanic. If you're this, you stay in that. If you're a lawyer, take it into the workplace. And that impacted me profoundly in the early days, and I think to this day I still keep an identity as a pro, even though I'm obviously a lot more ministerial than I used to be.
You reminded me of something when you were saying that about Oz Guinness, because I remember once explaining to somebody what we do at Links Players and how we try to, use the language of golfers and some of those things. And he said, well, it sounds to me like you could do that with auto mechanics. And I said, well,
absolutely.
I couldn't.
That's right.
Because I don't know auto mechanics. I don't know cars like they do. But boy, if you could talk cars and weave Jesus in, you could have that same sort of effect. And what we're saying then basically is there's an infinite number of ways to weave Jesus in to the real world life.
That's right. There's people in your circles, especially in your golf circles, that you are the best suited person in their entire life to speak to them about Jesus. I mean, when the gravity of that reality hits you, you know what? It's going to drive you to the Word. I mean, if you really see that, is that there are people in my life that I am the best suited person to talk to them about Jesus, you're going to want to study. You're going to want to spend time in prayer. It'll drive you to your fellowship. It'll drive you because you'll think, could that possibly be true? It's driven me for 20 some odd years now.
Wow. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeffrey.
And I know it drove Paul.
Well, we know it drove Paul. Yeah, absolutely. We hope it drives you, as a matter of fact. So we also hope we see you next time, because this is just a time that we love to share with you all each week. So see you soon.